Hey everybody, welcome to our very first online class with my lecture, which I hope makes an iota of sense. Um, Again, I apologize I'm not there yet, but uh, we will definitely go through our material today, and we're going to have some exercises. We're going to go over assignments and also discuss some principles that uh, constitute good writing, especially at the scholarly and collegiate levels. So, for these lectures and to be able to run class, it's going to be important that before you come to the virtual class, air quotes, before you come to the virtual class, that you do the reading. And the readings for today, of course, were the intro to They Say, I Say, the Rawls essay that is digital and on the week one module in Canvas, and the awesome Rebecca Solnit essay called The Inexhaustibility of the City, which is the intro to Infinite City, the text that we have. If you notice, I also have digital versions of those texts in the week one module, just in case you haven't been able to get the book or the books, or you just don't have the money yet. I understand that. Just to let you know some background on me, I'm the very first person in my family to go to college. I grew up in inner city Baltimore, and I grew up very poor. We grew up in project housing. So if you've seen The Wire, I actually grew up 6 blocks south of the towers. Uh, I had no money for books, and I'm really empathetic to that. And while you do need to get the texts, just remember there's always a way to procure them, even if you're completely broke. And if you need any help with that, please let me know. The most important thing to me is not that you buy the books necessarily, it's that you read them. And there's always a way to do that, either through our library loaning at the school, because they always have all texts on loan. I mean, I don't care if you five-finger discount. Just don't do it from the actual college, because that's kind of silly. And I don't condone that, TM. Anyway, let's get to our material. If you haven't read, stop this video, pick up those texts, read, and then come back to my shiny face. But if you have read, continue. All right. So, what we are doing today is just introducing some primary principles to writing, which has everything to do with the initial reason why we started communicating in the first place, and that was through observation. So, a couple things. One, in the They Say, I Say text in the introduction, we're not going to talk about that too much yet. It's just to kind of get you acclimated to the methodology of that text. But one of the things that really resonates with me about that text is that they right away, immediately, articulate the idea that writing is entering a conversation with others. And I like this idea because we have written for many reasons, but in a scholastic context, we have written because we are told to write for assignments. And while I'm sure everyone in the class has varying degrees of enjoyment with writing, we have some anxiety around writing. I think everyone does, even I do, and I'm a professional writer. We want to dispel that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we've always been measured in our writing. And while you also are going to be measured in your writing here, I want us not to think about that so much and to think more about the fact that we are entering conversation. When we write, we are responding to what other people have said and thought. And our writing is our way to enter into this kind of global conversation. And when I say global, I don't mean the earth, or it could be taken that way, but I just mean this larger conversation about something. And that's the power of it. So try to think of it in that way, much like the text tells us to. We are entering a conversation. So, on the heels of that idea, if you look in your modules under week 1, under Friday, I have our very first discussion question. And you can click on that if you want. But what I would like you to do is, based on the readings, I'd like you to enter into the conversation that Rawls and Solnit are kind of having, just by being juxtaposed with one another, about California in general. And Solnit is articulating more specifically about San Francisco, but Rawls is talking about California as a whole. And in both of these readings, they conjure lots of ideas about people's conceptions of California, including their own. So, if you look at the discussion question in the modules, I'm asking you a two-part. The first part is, what ideas about California resonated with you in the Rawls and the Solnit articles? What images? What ideas? And there's no right answer for this. What I want you to do is to really think about, after you've read them, like, what sticks in your mind? Because we need to pay attention to those moments when something kind of stays with us. And that's what I would like you to at first write down. Just a couple, 2 or 3. Is it an image? Is it a concept? Is it a narrative? What sticks? Again, no right answer, just what is bubbling up to the surface in your memory, in your recent memory, from reading those articles. Like, Solnit mentioned this, and it just kind of makes me go, Or, Rawls said this about California, and I thought that was compelling. Or, there's a theme that I'm seeing between Solnit and Rawls. They see California as emblematic of this idea. See what I'm getting at? So it's up to you. Write those down. Then, the second part of the discussion question is bringing in your own observations. Now, I know some of you have just landed to California, so you're probably wandering around going, what the hell is this place? And then others of you have lived here your whole life. And perhaps you're saying the same thing. What the hell is this place? California is complicated. It is not a singular identity. We know that. It is the most populated state in the nation. It is the 7th largest economy in the world. It is a fully self-sustainable state, even though we do struggle with water. But we could be one of the most viable nations on our own. And we supply about 1/3 of all agriculture, manufacturing, and several other goods of necessity to the rest of the country. That, right away, because of that kind of economic power, leads to an incredible, complex identity, let alone, its geographic beauties or its geographic alienations or what have you. What I'd like you to do is just, what are your impressions? Don't worry about your limited knowledge or expansive knowledge. What we're interested in is just what you know at the moment, what you observe, what you intuit. So just write down 2 more qualities that you would give California from your own observations. This discussion question actually leads us into beginning to think about what we're going to be doing for the first few weeks of the class, which is a visual analysis that tethers itself to our conceptions of what California is. Okay? I'll talk more about that in a moment. Next thing, All critical thinking and analysis, which is what writing is, begins with observation. The reason why we started talking, we started grunting and pointing, ugh, ugh, is because we were fascinated by the world around us and we couldn't explain it. And that immediate world is what inspired us to begin to communicate. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. But in order to observe and to document observation, we have to do it correctly. Because everything that we observe, whether it be in real time, in person, whether it be reading an article, whether it be watching a YouTube video, whether it be something in our imaginations, we process it through our minds, through two different primary modalities. What I'm talking about is the way that we describe something that we observe. And there are two ways of doing that. You probably heard the words connotation and denotation. What are they? Denotation is what all viewers from any culture and at any time would recognize an image as depicting, a universal property. What is there? Connotation is much more complicated. It's the sociocultural and personal associations, ideological, emotional, of an image, typically related to the interpreter's class, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, the region in which they grew up, all of the things that create what we understand to be our ideology. Very simple, right? Two definitions that, by the way, are in your modules so that you can reference them. Why am I bringing this up? Because this differentiation between the denotative and the connotative is one of the primary ways that we immediately begin to make mistakes in our identifications through observation. And it is when we make mistakes in this fundamental aspect of observing that we make erroneous judgments. And that's the reason why we're beginning our class with making sure that we differentiate these things. Let's look at an example. Okay? In your modules under week 1 and Friday, there is a file called Benetton. Could you click that? I'm giving you time to do that in real time. Okay, you see it, yes? Now, let's provide a denotative description of this image. Take a look at it. Look at the definition of denotation, what all viewers from any culture and at any time would recognize the image as depicting, a universal property. What do you see? You see a baby, presumably Caucasian, being what looks like being nursed by a woman, presumably, well, we can't even presume. Let's just say of darker skin. Yes? We see that she's wearing a red cardigan, but her breast is exposed. Yeah? She is cradling the baby up to the breast. What else do you notice? What about the fact that the photograph is framed in a way that cuts off her head? So we have kind of a disembodied black figure, female, who is nurturing, even nursing, a Caucasian baby to her breast. Yeah? That would be a denotation. Now, what are the connotations? of this image. And this is where it gets a little tricky. Maybe some of you, being born probably right around the year 2000, right? 1999, 2000, I would say most of you are. Maybe a lot of you are seeing the connotations as messages like anyone can be a mother, right? A connotation could be that this baby is perhaps not um, a natural birth from the woman in question, right? Now, of course, that could be argued, right? Because nature has a way of creating anomalies. But we would presume that that baby is not that woman's child by birth, but that perhaps that baby is the woman's child through social means, right? Through adoption or some other aspect. So maybe one of the messages we might get as people who are 18, 19, 20 years old would be that you can love no matter what. That love knows no familial bond. Yeah? Maybe we even see this image as being very positive. Or maybe we don't. Depending on your identity and knowledge of history. Because that is not the way this image was perceived. This image comes out in the early 90s. And even though we had come a long way in terms of the civil rights movement, right? We're in civil rights movement 2.0 at this point. The image was met with a lot of criticism. Why? Does anyone know their history? Well, let me just give you a little tidbit, a little narrative. The photographer of this image, Oliveri Toscani, was Italian, from Italy. And he was hired by Benetton, which was a clothier out of Europe, but trying to extend themselves widely in the United States. He was hired for a campaign that Benetton was really pushing. It was to brand Benetton as progressive and youthful. So this was to my demographic. And my generation were kind of like your generation with the LGBTQIA movement. We were like, why are people caring about interracial marriage? Why is there subjugation of different races? Okay, we were in that class of people that were cynical to the idea that that races needed to be separated. We really were about integration. Granted, we didn't fully succeed, obviously, right? We're still talking about these issues. It's a complex issue, and hopefully we're progressing, but that's for another conversation that we can have later. But that was our generation, and Benetton was trying to brand to our generation, a generation that would also be hopeful, who might see this particular image, as many images of like interracial love and people naked and connected, and all this stuff, right? This was the photographic campaign that Benetton was doing. Oops. Because even though this image of the woman breastfeeding the child was intended to be exactly what perhaps your connotative examinations would tell you, it didn't go off that way. Why? Well, Toscani is from Italy. Italy hasn't had a slavery issue in a very, very, very long time. They did away with slavery, I believe, in the 17th century. So they don't have more of a recent history like we do. And, in particular, Toscani didn't do his research. Because even though he intended this image to be about love knows no race, and goes beyond familial bonds. What he didn't anticipate was that many people who know the history of American slavery were going to look at this as being offensive. And if we know our history, we know that in many cases, white wives of slave owners, when they had children, oftentimes they would get one of the slave women who had also recently had a child and who had milk in her breast to breastfeed their children so that the integrity of their breast did not change. As we know, what happens quite often is that when women have children and breastfeed naturally, their breasts lose a little bit of their perkiness, right? And they become perhaps less attractive. That's a whole feminist idealization that we should probably discuss later. But a lot of these slave owners' wives would have these slave mothers breastfeed their children for that purpose. So obviously, this is a colonizing and offensive action. So many people, white, black, and everything in between in America, saw this and they found it incredibly offensive. You can understand why. Even though its intent was positive, the reception through connotative observation was negative. And this, in many cases, began to ruin Benetton and Toscani's career. Now, we can talk about whether that should have happened, but it doesn't matter really. The point being is that even though there was good intention behind the action, it didn't go as planned. And we have to think about that when we are observing and writing about our observations. How is this observation a denotation? Is it describing exactly what is there? Or are we roiling our observation with the ideologies that we have? We all come from different parts of the country. We come from different classes. We have different demographic information that identifies us, our environment, the religion that we have practiced or not practiced. All of these things are going to color the lens of how we perceive, how we observe, and how we process the world around us. So before we make presumptions, when we do our observations, we have to first and fundamentally describe what is actually there. What is there? So that we can get an accurate analysis. So that we can observe clearly and then be able to accurately analyze what we see. The methodology for this: always when you observe, start with denotation and then explore the potential connotations, usually because there are many. Let's look at an example of how, when we accidentally describe connotation and presume it is denotation, how that can go awry. Let's look at the swastika. Immediately, I say the word, and it's going to summon all of these incredibly negative feelings, yes? And makes sense. But I ask you, what is the denotation of a swastika? If you were to look at our description, at our definition, what all viewers from any culture and at any time would recognize the image as depicting a universal property, what would be the denotation of a swastika? Whenever I ask this question in class, you immediately get Nazi, or hatred, or Holocaust, right? Or if people know a little bit more of the historical connotations of the swastika, I might get Indian symbol for um, for prosperity, because as we know, the swastika was utilized, the same symbol with just a slightly different skewing, was used as a symbol for prosperity. Okay? Or if we know European history, other connotations, we would know that the swastika was a Druidic symbol from the area that we kind of think of as Ireland and northern England, as a meaning for unity and brotherhood. Those would all be connotations. What all viewers from any culture and at any time would recognize the image as depicting, well, someone from perhaps Botswana might not know about the Irish or Druidic history. They might not know about the Indian history. They might not even know, especially if they're completely under a rock, might not know about the more recent Nazi appropriation of the image itself, and of course the associations that we make to that. Notice that in all cases, those are connotations. So what is the denotation of the swastika? A series of lines and right angles. And that's it. This is important. When we are doing any kind of analysis, we have to make sure that we are at first seeing what is actually there and not what our history and our education and our ideologies are painting onto the image. We do that so that we can be clear in our analysis. Because think about it. When people look at that image and you say, what is there? And they think of hate, or they think of prosperity, or they think of unity. They are only seeing a limited vantage of that thing. And that is important because we respond to what we think is actually there. But if we confuse what is actually there with what we are gleaning through our ideological lens, we begin to make mistakes about what we're observing, right? We make misnomers or miscalculations. And so right away, however we respond to the thing is already built on an error. We call this hegemony. It's another fancy word, and I'm going to have that definition in the week 1 module. Maybe you've heard this term, but it's when a dominant thought process is so pervasive that it is seen as common sense or truth, which potentially could inspire discrimination and oppression and just miscalculation. Hegemony is connotation masking as denotation. And this happens quite often in our culture, in our observations. I'd love for you to think about others where we take something that its denotation is quite different than the way we presume its meaning to be, its common meaning to be. Think about it just with the Benetton ad, right? And of course, something as controversial as the swastika. We'll talk about this more, but it's important for us to understand that our ideologies are so ingrained in us that sometimes, even when we are asked to know the denotation of something, we will presume the connotation to be the denotation. We will look at the swastika and immediately go, Nazi, hate. And while it makes sense, right? Because that is almost a universal cultural association to the image. When we do that, we have also erased the 6,000 years of history of the image. And what does that mean? That, of course, is for another discussion. But it's interesting to think about, yes? All right. This makes a lot more sense when we can talk about it more in depth, but for the sake of this video lecture, I wanted to plant that idea in you. This idea that when we do observation, we should at first see the denotation, then understand the connotations, and only then do we evaluate the image through analysis. We want to avoid hegemony. We want to avoid the moments where our ideology informs so much, paints a picture of something that might not necessarily be what other people see. You see what I'm getting at? Because when we presume the truth of what we observe, but other people do not have the same experiences with that image, then we immediately have a miscommunication. And this miscommunication can lead to conflict. And we can think of that on the personal level or on the global level. Global level being war, personal level, obviously, interpersonal conflict. And that's what we want to avoid. So if we are to communicate, we want to be able to observe effectively initially. And that's kind of the takeaway from this. It's going to be important because our very first formal essay is a visual analysis. And we are linking that visual analysis to qualities of California that we are seeing. So at some point, maybe, look at the prompt for the cultural artifact analysis, which is our first formal essay. We're not going to talk about it right now because I don't want to confuse you, but I will be formally discussing it on Monday, in Monday's video lecture. Okay? Our very first written assignment that's graded is one of those thinking rhetoric papers that I discussed in the intro video on Wednesday. And it is practicing this idea of the denotative description. So, if you notice in your week 2 module, you will see Thinking Rhetoric Paper number 1. Click on the prompt. Its official name is Thinking Paper number 1.docx. Okay? Why don't you pull that up? And I'm going to go through the assignment with you because this is due on Monday. It's a short paper, but it's having us practice this initial form of observation that we call denotation. Okay. So I'm going to just read along, and hopefully it makes sense. This thinking paper is meant for you to begin considering what visual you'd like to examine as a contemporary artifact of the California dream, and this is part of that larger assignment that we'll talk about more on Monday, and to consider its denotative signification. The first key element for any successful analysis is to concretely describe the subject of analysis in question. That way, as the complexity of the subject is explored throughout the essay, the reader is familiar with its form, and the reader is familiar with how the author, you, understands its form. And this is the key to analysis. So, mainly what you're doing. 1. Describe your selection for analysis. And you're going to choose an image that you think metaphorically somehow embodies the California dream. And that's going to be up to you to figure out what that is. Describe the compositional elements. What form does it take? What are its materials? What recognizable elements are evident in the composition? What about the environment of the image? What are the subject's denotations? So, this image that I'm referring to, that you're going to hopefully utilize for your cultural artifact analysis, could be an artwork, it could be a photograph that you've taken, it could be a photograph that someone else has taken, it can be an iconic image like the Golden Gate Bridge or the Transamerica Pyramid. It could be any image. That's up to you. Doesn't matter what you select, as long as you are utilizing it to somehow extract the qualities from the image and apply it to California as a whole. So you can kind of do anything, right? It's just up to you to figure out what image you want. In this thinking paper, you are just describing it, denotatively. That is all. No connotation. You are practicing just observing what is there. It's not the most terribly exciting writing, but it's so that we are practicing this idea of differentiating denotation from connotation. So this paper is relatively short. I can't imagine it going more than 2 pages. Okay? Describing just what is there for whatever image you choose. Okay? Second, and this is ancillary compared to that first part, briefly discuss the creator or the context of the subject of the image you've chosen. Who is the artist? Artist, if there is one. Where are they from? What are their influences? What information seems to be of interest about this image in relation to the goal of the analysis? Is there something compelling about its creation or the place in which it was created? Obviously, if you were to do something like the Golden Gate Bridge, you probably look at the history of it being built, because that might contribute to the qualities that you could then assign to it about the California dream, right? So maybe you describe a little bit about its history, or maybe its background, the fact that it spans the what is it called? The Golden Gate, the strait that goes across the waterway. So maybe you describe the Marin Headlands. I don't know. That's up to you. Okay. Most likely you will not incorporate all of the information explored here into your analysis, the cultural artifact essay that you're going to write later. However, this exercise is opening up considerations about the image, and you might, through the denotative description, you might notice something about your artwork or about your iconic image or the photograph that you haven't noticed before. So you can see that doing a denotative exercise, while not exactly the most exciting thing, could actually inform your analysis in really interesting ways, because you will notice more, because you're not interpreting the image. And that's what I want to warn you against. Do not interpret the image in this assignment. That is the goal. Denotation is only describing what is there. Interpretation is connotation. You'll be surprised how difficult that is for us to do, which is exactly why we're doing it. Because that is the mistake that humanity makes all the time. Again, they confuse connotation with denotation. They interpret before they see what is actually there. And that gets us into trouble when we analyze, when we navigate the world around us. So stick to denotation. Cool? I hope that makes sense. All right. That is due on Monday. And it's due at the end of the day on Monday. So you have plenty of time to figure out what image you might want to consider for this analysis overall. And the very first thing you'll be doing, of course, is this thinking paper, just describing the denotation. Cool? If you have any questions about that, you're welcome to contact me. Remember that I am available, despite the fact that I'm not physically there. So I would say the thing that you want to think about before you even jump into that thinking paper is figure out what image you would like to use for this analysis that you're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. And this is just based on your knowledge of California. I'll give you some examples of what people have done in the past. Maybe that'll be helpful. Okay. People have done the Golden Gate Bridge, right? That's probably the most common. And I mentioned the Transamerica Pyramid. People have done album covers. In particular, someone did, it was a Frank Ocean song. I think it was called California. I'm drawing a blank on it right now. But it's about his experience in LA, right? So they did his video, or not his album cover, but his video. People have done art that has been specific to California, like Ed Ruscha's Hollywood sign. People have done movie posters. They've done photographs that friends have taken that have been posted on Instagram. They have done, people have done even products like It's It, which is an amazing ice cream sandwich that is made in the Bay Area. The list goes on. It could be any image. So maybe just kind of consider that. Think about what kind of image comes to mind when you think of California. Just make sure it's a very specific image. You don't want to do just any surfboard. You want to make it a very specific image of a surfboard. That's going to just be helpful when you do the analysis. Okay. Choose what that is, and then jump into this thinking paper and just describing what is there. Okay. If you want to brainstorm ideas for your image, let me know, because I can certainly help you with that, because I've run the gamut. And we're also going to be reading for our classes next week. We're going to be reading other examples of analyses of images that relate to California. So that might even be able to kind of jumpstart some of your thinking about possible objects or images. Okay. All right. Lastly, sorry there's so much. Lastly, you'll notice in the syllabus there is this thing called the diagnostic essay. Please do not freak out about that. Do not freak out. This is an ungraded 3-paragraph essay that I am asking you to write today, by the end of the day. It should not take a long time. Okay. The purpose of this diagnostic is just to give me an idea about your writing style. That's it. I'm not grading it. It's not determining anything other than just kind of the style of writing that you do. So if you look in Module 1, Week 1 module, you'll see the prompt, Fall 2018 Diagnostic Prompt. Okay. All I'm asking you to do is to write those 3 paragraphs. I wouldn't take more than 15-20 minutes to do this. Okay. There is a little bit to read on Eloquentia Perfecta, which is a Jesuit concept of rhetoric that you're responding to. So read that brief, very brief, I think it's like a 1.5 page essay, writing on Eloquentia Perfecta. Write those 3 paragraphs, and then post it in the spot designated in the Week 1 module. It says diagnostic essay. Just, write it in a document, like a docx or a PDF, or, whatever you write through, and then just submit it to that diagnostic essay submission spot. Hopefully that makes sense. Please, again, do not stress about this. I don't want you stressing about it at all. Indeed, the discussion question that I'm asking you to do, while obviously won't take much time at all, is more important because it's generating ideas for you to consider for this first essay assignment. Okay? So, just to summarize all of that, do the discussion question on California images based on the reading, if you haven't already. Do this quick diagnostic essay and submit it. Those are due today. Then, for Monday, the thinking paper that is performing a denotative description only of whatever image you choose that you think somehow embodies the characteristics of California that you're interested in exploring. And that's due Monday. If you have any questions about any of this, please contact me. Otherwise, have a good rest of the day and have a great weekend. Go explore. Go explore San Francisco. There's so much to see, especially because the weather is going to be getting really nice. Our summers begin at the beginning of September. All right. Take care, y'all.